Welcome to the Counterweight podcast. I am Doug Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Partner for Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. And I'm joined weekly by my co-host, James Kanary, founder and owner of the Upper Right Corner. Together, we are focused on speaking to and learning from growth leaders across the healthcare space about their journeys and lessons learned. James and I want to explore how growth leaders manage this tension not only for their teams, but also with their leaders and in many cases, board members and investors. We will discuss with our guests the career journey they have been on, key influences that help them put them into the position they are today. We will talk about successes and challenges, what they learned from these events for themselves and for their teams. Join us each week for a new episode with our guest. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn under the name The Counterweight Podcast. Subscribe, like, follow, and give us feedback as we go along. Now on to the show. Welcome. My name is Doug Rogers. I am joined by my co-host, James Kanary. This is an episode of The Counterweight. And as always, we are excited, really pumped to have Chris Vernaci join us on the pod. It is going to be a fantastic conversation. And you may be able to see, if you're watching the video versus listening to the audio, Chris is going to lean back. He's got his company logo. He's proudly repping HART, not just his heart, but HART. He'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Why is the tag still on the shirt? That's weird.
Oh, you caught me.
Yeah. No, way to rep your company, dude. But let's be honest. You were wearing a Chiefs jersey today.
I took it off. I thought I needed to look professional.
Yeah,
on this
no,
podcast.
you do. You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. You're putting the company first, but as soon as this podcast's over, you're going to put that jersey back on.
Or the jerseys underneath the shirt. He's just rip it off.
He's just gonna rip off. He's gonna rip off.
I've got some red shoes on.
Yes. Woo! So I've got Current, because the KC Current plays tonight and Chiefs play Sunday. So we're repping. I just love to see just like Hulk Hogan style, just like rip the heart shirt off.
My
the
Chiefs
jersey
undershirt.
underneath.
That's
totally.
right.
So
all about it.
For our listeners, those who are not seeing the video, I want to guide that we're venturing into some new territory. Feet ripping off clothing.
We might be attracting some different listeners than our traditional audience.
But we welcome everyone, whether you're here for the digital health growth leadership or other things.
Whatever you're into.
We are here for you. But with that being said,
this is a podcast
for everybody.
That's
for
right.
Everyone. Absolutely.
That's right. Chris, it is a genuine pleasure to have you on the pod. Why don't we first start? Just tell our listeners a little bit about what you're doing these days, where you're at, your role, and we'll dive right in.
Yeah, that sounds great. And first, the pleasure is all mine. This is fun to do the podcast with you guys. I've known you guys for a long time and some prior work dealings. So it's good to be here. Thank you. As Doug said, my name is Chris. I'm the Senior Vice President of Growth and Commercial Sales at HART. And HART is a startup health tech company that was founded in Orange County, California. But at the beginning of this year, HART relocated the headquarters to Kansas City, which I love to see. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our good friend Dick Flanagan and Digital Health KC, because they had a hand in bringing HART into the river market. And, for myself, I spent quite a few years working for Cerner or Oracle Health. And so my next journey, I knew I wanted to stay in health tech, but it was also important for me to find something Kansas City based. And so I really appreciate what Digital Health KC is doing, kind of foster that community and make those opportunities available for myself and others.
And once again, for our listeners who are listening and not watching, but for those watching, you are actually in your office. Meaning that
that's right.
HART has a physical location here in Kansas City, which, that's a separate discussion podcast on remote, in-person, hybrid. That's not the thing we're venturing into, but just really, really cool. Y'all have a footprint, a real footprint here in Kansas City.
Yeah. And such like a great area, the River Market, James is sporting his KC current hat. There's a lot of energy and vibe all throughout Kansas City, but the River Market's cool. It's fun. We've got, picture old brick building that's been renovated, loft space, exposed ceilings, really gives that startup vibe. And, it's interesting, like we don't have a requirement on people being based in Kansas City or coming into the office every day. But most people who are in Kansas City actually do come into the office most days. I think that's been a little bit of a positive surprise that people just kind of want to get back together in person.
The same way, man. I love having an office to come into. I missed when we didn't have that, right? I mean, COVID was tough on a lot of people. I know companies are trying to figure out that right balance of, do we, require people to come in? And it's good. It sounds like people are choosing to come in, which is great. That's what you want. You don't want it to feel forced. Is there anything, if you can share, like, is there anything you guys are doing that helps attract folks to come into the office? Is there some attractional things, or is it just, hey, like, I want to work in the River Market? What's the secret?
I think there's a few things here. One, I think we're a little bit fortunate that we're a smaller organization. When I was at Oracle Health, it was difficult to figure out what to do, what to say. And at the end of the day, you could never really get a critical mass of people into the office. And so the space was just too big and it felt empty. And I think that was demotivating for people to come into the office. When you're part of a smaller business, it only takes a handful of people to feel like the office is busy. So I do think there's an element of it's just easier in a smaller business versus a large organization. The space is fun. Like we definitely think that the space helps us recruit people, and we think it helps keep people interested in coming into the office. And probably the last thing I would say would just be culture. Given that we are a small business, we lean in heavily on the individuals. It's not that we're not looking for smart people. We absolutely are. But like I always tell everyone I interview, HART is a small place. You got to like the people you work with, because if you don't, there's no hiding in a cubicle. And so from a leadership perspective, we kind of team interview just about everybody, so that people can get a sense of our culture and who we are, and we get a sense of who they are. And so, we're finding people that are like-minded, all have the different styles and approaches, but like-minded, and that they want to have a little bit of fun at work and just makes it an enjoyable place to be.
So I love that, that excitement and the connectivity, one that you're building and that you get to build. Let's take a moment and just help our listeners understand, first and foremost, who is HART? What do you offer into the marketplace? What's the thing that you're selling? And then you've already touched on this, but I think it'd be good to explore a little bit more. You came from a big company, as you said, Oracle, formerly Cerner, thousands and thousands and thousands of people all around the world. And now you're with HART, which is how many people?
Just under 30.
Yeah. All right. So, talk a little bit about what HART does, and then let's talk about what that transition is like, especially for you as a leader, to go into small big value, big purpose, and some of the things that you're grappling with as part of that transition.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, HART is a startup. Ironically, though, I'd say it's a 12-year-old startup, which is weird to say, a 12-year-old startup. That means our growth was somewhat stunted in the earlier years of development. But HART started actually out of the St. Joe's Health System, eventually Provident, and part of the innovator incubator organization they have. And what we call HART 1.0, when it was based in Orange County, California, it was largely a development shop. They did a lot of one-off custom development for a lot of health tech companies, provider organizations. But what they didn't do is they didn't really put a commercial wrapper around a core product. And, with that core product, the go-to-market strategy, market messaging, sales, none of that stuff really existed until the early part of this year. And so therein lies the growth challenge that HART had over the last several years. And so now we're on HART 2.0, the second generation leadership team, of which I'm very humbled and proud to be a part of that leadership team. And, the last year was really spent around putting in process and tooling, a CRM, which we'll probably get to later, some of the tools we use. None of those things existed. Everything from accounting practice to how we're going to sell to clients, how we implement, how we support, really none of that stuff had a process around it. So that was kind of the last year is putting those things in place. And this year was really about the scale and growth. So this was kind of our big splash, moving to the Kansas City market and ultimately taking our core product to that market. Our core product is data movement. So said simply, we move data from point A to point B. Probably most of the folks listening to this podcast realize how difficult that is.
And outside.
Yeah. I talk to friends or relatives, they're like, there's just no copy paste button. Yeah, I wish there were. Actually, maybe I don't wish there were, because then I wouldn't have a job. But what's unique about HART, there are other companies that do this. But traditionally it's very time consuming. It'd take you 12 to 18 months in some cases to move data around in healthcare, because it's largely services based. And what's special about HART is HART uses tech automation to automate the vast majority of that process. So, we don't have a lot of people doing this data movement, and in between the data movement, transforming it from one spec to another. And so what usually would take 12 to 18 months takes us 6 to 12 weeks, literally.
Oh, wow.
And because of the automation, we're not using a bunch of people, the time frames condensed, all those things, the cost for us to move healthcare data is significantly less than kind of the market expectation. So that's ultimately what attracted me to be here. The hard part about HART is if we do our jobs really well, and I've actually had some clients say this to me, if we do our job well, you don't know we exist. That's both a good and a bad thing from a sales perspective. But that's the reality, is we want to make moving the data so seamless that you almost don't know we exist.
Yeah, that's right. It is a very important aspect of healthcare that people probably don't fully appreciate, especially with some of the transitory state that health systems are in, going from one system to the next, or adding systems around the edge, on top, underneath, what have you. Chris, in your prior role, so you had a big job. You can probably just touch on and describe a little bit about what you're doing before you transitioned into HART. But I guess what I would frame up or ask of you, the dynamic of how you engaged clients and what you did both individually and as a team, I have to imagine that was different. There was a level of infrastructure. There was a level of recognition when you walked into a room, whether it was a current client or you were there on behalf with another team with a prospect. They said, I know Oracle, I know Cerner, right? You didn't have that first 30 seconds of who am I, why am I here, et cetera. HART probably doesn't have a lot of that. So talk a little bit about what are the things as you made the transition that you have to think about, not just you as a leader, but then what are you doing with your teams to navigate the unknown, the introduction, the how do I get past the, I don't even know if I want to talk to you. I've got to get past that barrier. How are you wrestling with that today across your team?
Yeah, I would say you're spot on. My number one barrier I have at HART is the name recognition. We talk about it just about every single day. What are we doing? That's largely the marketing interaction. How are we getting the name out there just so that people know who we are? And as you said, you walk in the room, and whether it was in the Cerner days or the Oracle days, everybody in the industry knows those two names. And so you didn't really have to qualify or credential yourself.
Mhm.
So, my main thing is I kind of just come out and say that. Several weeks ago, I met some leaders from Kaiser, actually. So large, extremely large health system. And, part of my opening line was around, hey, I realize like organizations the size of Kaiser don't typically work with an unknown name. That's the irony. And I think in healthcare tech is there's a lot of innovation in these unknown names, but there's also a lot of hesitation in these large provider organizations because it's not a name they know. They don't want to take a risk on an unknown. So, I think just saying that up front helps take down those walls, because then they realize, oh, I'm talking to a person who truly understands the industry. And then the next thing I say is, let me tell you why I came to HART, because that was my choice as well. I had a great job, and I elected to come do this. And so, in effect, what I'm saying to them is, I'm betting my livelihood, my family's livelihood on HART. It must mean I believe in it. I started with, hey, I know that you don't work, basically credentialing that I know the industry. And so now it's kind of 1 + 1 = 2. I'm talking to a person who knows the industry. I'm talking to a person who they bet their own livelihood on it because they believe in this so much. So, wow, I should probably hear them out. It's generally that formula that I find just takes down that barrier, and it opens up to the conversation of like, all right, tell me what's special and unique about what you have to offer.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's been a bit of like finding out who you are and what your products are and commercializing those for growth and scaling for growth. Like if you could tell us, like, what are you finding there? Like, are you choosing your customers and going, okay, we want to talk to these type of organizations? Is it, providers, payers, whatever? And then are you targeting them specifically? I mean, what are you learning there as you kind of grow into your product set, into your offerings, right? Because you can't do everything for everybody. You don't want to be too broad. You don't want to be a custom development shop that's doing, one project. If you see one project, you see one project kind of thing.
Right.
What are you learning there, and how are you then trying to kind of commercialize that? I think our listeners would love to learn from any lessons you've had there.
Yeah. I would say this is also a huge benefit of having people in the office, because when the team are on phone calls with clients, prospective clients, everyone around you can hear the conversation. So sometimes we do this as a sales team. We do this every single week with the marketing team. And we just say, hey, these are the things that we're saying that are resonating. These are the things that we thought were an important aspect of our product portfolio, and no one is really taking that and running with it. So let's stop focusing efforts on that, and let's just focus on what's working. And so that's a huge part of it. As far as our target clients, it's who you would expect. It's the great new thing about what we do is we don't have to develop a bunch of different products to serve a lot of different parts of the healthcare market. So, everything from IDN, large health system providers, community hospitals, physician practices, payers, so kind of all ends of the spectrum. You don't have to adapt to meet all those markets. The value proposition is a little bit different for each of those markets. And so how we talk about the value we provide in the platform, we definitely tailor based on, provider, payer, the size of the provider organization. But we don't have to tailor the product so much. It's more just the messaging and why it would resonate to, each individual segment, if you will.
Yeah, that's awesome. So really calibrating that messaging almost real time. Sounds like when you hear like, oh, we're trying this with payers, we're trying this with community hospitals. And if it's, you fire a calibrated bullet and you okay, this is where, then we're going to do the cannonball, right? So it's
that's right.
Jim Collins, great by choice, bullets, then cannonballs. So how how do you like then decide, okay, we're going to go big here? Like, is it, are you doing BDRs? Are you doing campaigns? I mean, what's kind of the model there? What's working? What's not working? I know our growth leaders are always kind of try to figure this out. Seems like it changes constantly, but anything you can share there, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So the first thing we stepped back and we evaluated, like, what are the different segments of our client base or prospective client base we want to go after. I should say what really helps here is my boss, the CEO, Dominique Gross of HART. She's a career marketer. So this is great. I've got a marketing expert and me as the sales guy. It's a great dynamic duo. So she's the one that really forces us to kind of step back. Let's evaluate the market segments. Let's then put together a value proposition and messaging to support that value proposition. And then it was, for a couple of months, it was like, let's just go, sales team go. And then we started to dial in on where do we see the most activity and need for our product offering. And so that's where we started to dive in on the focus. And a couple of things we did there. One, we started to draw out territories for the team, not geographic. We actually don't have to travel a lot to get our deals through the pipeline. So the geography doesn't really matter, but it's, hey, community hospitals is the focus area of ours. So let's just put one person in charge of community hospitals so they don't even have to think what message, are they going to lead with when they talk to their prospective clients. And so we've structured our team around those segments. And then we leverage campaigns, and we have a sales development representative that is doing the cold calls, email sequencing to try and go drum up some opportunities in those various segments. And when she finds something, then it gets passed off to, whoever is covering that particular segment.
And Chris, I know you referenced this, you picked and you're using a CRM. If you feel comfortable, what CRM are you using? And is that the tool that your SDR is using to orchestrate the campaigns?
Yeah. So we use HubSpot. Totally comfortable saying that. Shameless plug for HubSpot. Personally, I love it. For our business, it's great. It's fairly easy to configure. I've used Salesforce in a prior life. It also was great, but I think it's too much for a business like ours. So HubSpot is that sweet spot. They also have a lot of nice native, like, built-in integration points with your email and Zoom and things like that. We were leveraging HubSpot as our CRM. We build lists, call contacts, but then we also use Zoom Info. So Zoom Info is where, we might see a Becker's article that there are 19 health systems who are moving to Epic. And so we can take those lists, plug them into Zoom Info, and figure out who the decision makers are in that space. And, that's a use case for HART. And so it's the combination of, we're generating a list, but there's a lot of thought behind the list. And then we use Zoom Info plus HubSpot to facilitate connecting with the folks that we think have a need for our products.
And I'll give a shout out. I mean, not so much to Zoom Info, although they have a great product. And there's several of these options out there that our listeners can look at, evaluate. But, Chris, this may have been your experience. I know this was my experience when at the bigger company. We never had a problem having a list of people to talk to, especially, my own personal experience, more so focused on the client base. I knew the people to call, and they were largely, I was calling you, and then you were helping me navigate the client who you had a very direct relationship with. So the concept of list development, enrichment, and then execution was just a given. And I know, so I'm in a small business, we're 0 to 1. And that is one of the hardest things that we grapple with is How do I get who do I go talk to? I know who I want to talk to, but identifying that person, how you get a hold of them, and then trying to put that at scale is a much harder endeavor than what I probably appreciated when I transitioned from big to small, if you will. Just take a moment and comment, if you will. Walk us through what your team looks like. So I think you've got a sales team, you mentioned that, and then you have an SDR. And then what are y'all doing from either a coaching or methodology standpoint to align then with your, you use the word profiles, but I interpret it as ideal client profiles or ICP. You've done your personas, you've lined that up with your list, and you've got sequences going out. Then how does that translate into what you're asking your AEs or your outbound sales reps to do from an engagement perspective? And how are you coaching or developing them in that process?
Yeah, that's a hefty question.
I probably could have broken that up into a couple. Yeah. That's my bad. Sorry, listeners. We'll dive right into the meat of it.
I'll unpack and try and keep things in order. Yeah, I mean, again, benefit of probably in the small business right now. I can open my office door right here and my entire team is right there. So I can hear them on the phone. I can shout out there and say, hey, come over here.
Which is powerful. I mean, that is a superpower that's understated, especially for a business like this, is to be able to reach out, touch, and have that agility. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I could shout at them, hey, come in here, let's chat about something for a minute. But you're right. Like that was probably one of the scarier realizations when I first stepped foot into the office here. It's like, oh man, the realities of being at a company where the industry is not just calling you because you're not one of the big platforms is a little bit scary. So to jumpstart things, I do have the benefit of having spent 16 years working in the industry. And so I would say not just relationships, because I think sometimes relationships almost have like a negative connotation, but like friendships with people. And I leveraged a lot of those connections. One of the great things about the Cerner world is if you go through a dartboard full of health tech companies, there's probably a former Cerner leader there in some form or capacity. And so even before I decided to come here, the first thing I did is I went on LinkedIn and I basically filtered for the Cerner alumni team. And the people that I knew, some of them I knew really well, and some of them I knew them and I knew they would know my name. But I started messaging them, hey, I'm looking at this company. Would you come look at it with me? And if you're going to HIMSS or Vive, because that was the time of the year that I was starting to look, go check out HART when you're at HIMSS or Vive. Let me know what you think, because it sounds pretty interesting to me. And if it passes your test, I may go work there. And what was really awesome, I think it speaks to the culture that we had at Cerner, is 100% of those people responded to those messages and they did go check out HART at HIMSS or Vive. And I'm not being dramatic. All of them came back to me and said, hey, this is incredible. Let me know when you land there, and or let me know when you make your decision. And then I want to talk partnership, contract, all that sort of stuff. Right. And so kind of bringing the people along in my own journey helped me jumpstart the sales engine. And then as like a lot of, you guys know, and a lot of these listeners know, to some extent, one deal starts to lead you to the next. It's that snowball rolling down the hill and getting bigger. So that was huge. And as I did that before I came in, I started to build out a strategy. The other thing I wanted here is I wanted the autonomy for me to put together a strategy and be able to go execute that strategy. And so when I started to hone in on those things, it was one of the meetings I had with Dominique. I sat down with her and said, okay, like this would be my day one strategy. What do you think? And she liked it. And I was like, great. So I can actually come here and build a strategy and execute and go do stuff. Awesome. That's like a huge thing I'm looking for. So that's kind of how I jump started things. Then it was about, but that's not sustainable forever, know? So that's when we started I hired an SDR. We started the campaigns, and every day in those campaigns, we're fine tuning how we say things. how do you word things? Because we all get a bunch of emails every day and we delete a lot of them. So how do you prevent yourself from just being another deleted email in the inbox? And so we're carefully showing, through the words, like there's thought and intention. We're not just blasting out emails and hoping somebody responds. Like it's very, very targeted. And I work with our SDR to say, hey, look at this email I got. People creatively try to send automated emails that look like a person put thought into it, but you can spot that stuff. And so we just don't do that. And, like I said before, having the whole team sitting together, they hear each other, they fine tune what they say, they kind of make it their own. And then we celebrate the wins, not just the big ones, the small ones. My SDR got a great lead today. And like we ring a bell, we high five when we get a lead. Cause like that's a really awesome. Big deal when you're at a place like HART and people aren't just calling you every day asking for you to sell them what you got.
I think that's a big deal everywhere. We don't celebrate enough. We get too focused on KPIs, OKRs, metrics, and we got to remember to celebrate more. I think companies are terrible at this for the most part. I love that you have that in your culture. I'm not surprised people want to come into the office when there's stuff like that going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're celebrating those things, those small victories. It sounds like I'm hearing a lot of agility is kind of the takeaway here, right? Of being willing to calibrate quickly and kind of move to that next thing. And it sounds like you're doing that. You're learning things. How are you learning from failure? Failure is a topic that we talk about on this podcast. We want to be open about the fact that we are professionals at failing. We have all failed in some way in our careers in many ways, and it's gotten us to where we are, hopefully because we've learned from those failures. What's that look like for you guys? You're going to probably get a lot of doors slammed in your face or getting ghosted or, some competitor sneaks in or whatever. How do you guys deal with that?
Yeah. I had a boss, at Oracle. He would say all the time, control the controllables. So, first of all, when it comes to failure, sometimes it was controllable. Sometimes, let's just be honest, it really was not. And I don't know if that's the answer a lot of CEOs want to hear, but I think that's the harsh reality is sometimes failure was not always controllable. And so we just, number one, I could try not to dwell on that. I don't dwell on what's not controllable. I focus on the controllable things. And then I would say, failure culturally, failure is one of those things people don't comfortably talk about either. Many years ago, I saw this interview. It was the new CEO of Ford Motor Company at that time. So this was circa 2007, 2008, when the government was bailing out all the big automakers. He previously was the CEO of Boeing before he went into Ford. And he got a lot of criticism, like he doesn't know the automotive industry. It's very complicated. And he got the question like, Ford is actually a really good turnaround story in that era. They didn't take any government bailout money. And when he was asked why, he said, well, when I would go to my executive meetings, big boardroom, graphs and charts all over the walls. He said, I'd walk in and like all the graphs and charts were green. Everything was good, yet like our business was actually really bad. And so like, how could that be the case? And that's because in the automotive business, culturally, if there was something red, you got your head kicked in. And so people just didn't talk about or show the red. And he said there was a meeting where on a chart, one of my executives had something in red and I stood up and applauded that person. And that's when all of a sudden, okay, like now the bad thing was the next meeting, the wall was all red. But like, if you don't talk about the problems, you don't know the problems, you can't solve them. And so I think that's a big part of it is like just making it okay to talk about failure a little bit. It is okay to fail, to stumble. but have a plan. So, usually if my team's struggling, I'll say, hey, clearly we're struggling, right? Like, let's talk about this a little bit. And they now know my next question is, so what do you think we should do? And that was, that what do you think we should do was a little bit of my maybe leadership evolution too. Because my going in position is I want to go problem solve. I want to be a good teammate. I'll roll my sleeves up. But then I realized like that kind of made me a micromanager, made my team maybe more codependent than I wanted them to be. So, culturally making it okay to fail. So let's talk about it. But then at the same time, like pushing people to think about what we should do next so that they can, they can fish on their own.
That's really good. That's really good stuff. Talk about managing up. So that's kind of the managing down of, hey, creating an environment where the team can feel comfortable saying, hey, this isn't going well, or, we had a failure or whatever, and then learning from it. How do you manage expectations? All of our companies have growth expectations. One of the reasons we created this podcast and called it the Counterweight is because of that mission of healthcare and trying to strike a balance, if there is such a thing, with margins, healthy margins and growth, right? We're expected to grow, and yet we have a very important mission in front of us. When you're managing expectations about growth, right? We saw this in private equity. We saw it in big companies that we've worked for where the growth expectations are up here because somebody went to a seminar and decided that everybody should have double-digit growth, and we grew 20% last year, so that means we can grow 30% this year, right? How do you manage those expectations, and especially when they're not aligned with what reality? How do you manage that?
Yeah, managing up, just that alone, managing up for me has always been a challenge because, like, my personality is I'm a people pleaser to a fault. And so I usually want to say, hey, yes, boss, whatever you need, I'll go do it, because that's the people pleaser side. So like managing up, I'll just be honest, it is still an uncomfortable thing for me. But my approach to it would be, especially in the small business world, when I was working at Cerner and Oracle, you do deal review, maybe weekly, every other week, monthly. In the small business, you're doing like deal review hourly.
Yeah.
And like it can be exhausting. So, something I actually have said this to Dominique, like if you were on an airplane and you're flying through turbulence, and all throughout the turbulence, the pilot is telling you everything that he's worried about or concerned about, as a passenger, you would freak the hell out, right? They don't do that, right? Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Give me 5 minutes. We're going to cruise to altitude 35. We're going to get out of this, right? Like, but you don't hear the stream of conscious. And so, in the small business environment, the daily deal reviews, I say that like, hey, sales is not easy. When we do it well, sometimes it looks easy, but like there's a lot of ups and downs and roller coasters, especially on some of your bigger deals. And so if you want hourly updates, you got to know that you got to have a stomach for hourly updates. Yeah. Even if we're going to win the deal, there's probably a minute in the middle that we actually thought we might not. So if you don't have a stomach for that, then don't ask me the questions. But then, the manage up. So like I came into HART with expectations. And my going in position was, hey, these expectations were set. I want to come work here. So I have to be okay with these expectations. And so that to this day is still true. I am perfectly okay with those expectations. But if we don't have a path to getting that expectation, don't sugarcoat it, right? Show the red on the graph. Just say that. And so, really coming out and just saying, look, we've got a gap to getting to our plan. However, here is what I'm doing about it. Very similar to what I push my team to do. We have a gap, but this is what I think we do about it. And as long as there's a strategy and a plan, in my experience, leaders at all levels are generally okay if you're not currently on track, but you've got a strategy and a plan, they're generally okay and you'll live to fight another day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's good stuff. Really good.
There's a phrase, I don't really know who to attribute it to, other than I heard it ad nauseum when back in Bigco, if you will, which is bad news should travel faster than good news. And what's somewhat unique now as you made the transition into HART, when you were at Bigco, right, you had a lot of people that you reported to, you were in a big role, you had a lot of senior executives that you had direct relationships engaged with. Now, not only do you report to the CEO, but you have a direct conversation with people who have put money into the business, into the investor. And, for our listeners, for those who are thinking about that type of transition, just talk a little bit about what that dynamic is.
Yeah. I mean, I think, part of it is everything is relative.
Yeah.
So whether my boss is the CEO or a VP or a director, kind of just keeping the mindset of like, it's still just my boss at the end of the day. And they still wake up every day and put pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. So, that, and even at the board level, you're talking to investors who are leaders of large organizations. If you start to dwell on kind of who they are and what they've done, it's, at least for me, it's very easy for like the self-doubt to creep in, like, what in the heck am I doing here? So it's kind of all just getting back to like, everything's relative. I am here for a reason. They decided they wanted me to come lead this business. So part of it is just kind of picking yourself up and keeping the confidence every day. Going from big co to small co, it was interesting. Probably the biggest criticism I felt coming from the board level here is like, hey, is this just a corporate guy? And in their minds, a corporate guy is, or gal, is that person who needs infrastructure and a large team to be successful. And so when I was asked that, I said, well, look, I know who Oracle is, obviously, and I know what you probably think of Cerner, but there was a day, and you guys were there, Cerner wasn't like this large corporation. And so, I feel like anybody who has worked, not just for Cerner, but probably any health tech with experience in the industry, like a Cerner, if you've been there for 10 years or more, you remember when it felt like a startup. And so you had to learn how to do everything because there was nobody else to do it. And so, it's really that hustle. I related back to that. I said, Cerner was a very entrepreneurial company. I think other health tech firms that have been around for a while, they still have that in their DNA, and it lends itself really well to this environment. Now, look, there's still a couple of like weird things. Like, I got to remember to take out my own trash every day because there's nobody to go around and take out my trash.
We used to say that as a metaphor, like, oh, we take out our own trash. No, literally, you take out your own trash.
Yeah.
But you know what, though? I think that's a mentality, though, that we need to adopt broadly, whether you're part of a big company, startup, scale up, Series A, Series F, whatever. Like, take ownership, have an ownership mentality, take out your own trash, do the work.
Yeah.
Like, roll up your sleeves. And I've fallen victim to this when I went to smaller companies coming from the big corporate environment, and I had trouble adjusting. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm the guy that needs to do that. Right. So it was a big adjustment. But I think what I see when I'm coming alongside companies and helping with growth strategies, they stop doing the things that got them off the ground. Right. So if you look at your clients that you have now, a lot of your best clients that you have now came from when people like founders, whoever, had that ownership mentality and went out and found those clients and worked their tail off to get those clients. Why do we stop doing that?
Yeah.
Well, why do we think that just because we're a series whatever, or we got a bunch of investment, or now we're publicly traded, like we don't need to have that sort of mentality anymore, and we're just going to let the marketing team do it? That's a trap.
You're so right. Like, this is almost embarrassing, but I'll say it anyways because I'm, sometimes self-deprecating humor is the best. But one of the things that happened to me when I came here is I noticed one day, like all my meetings that I was joining, they were dithered out on my calendar because I hadn't accepted them because I got so comfortable in the corporate environment. Like I had an admin managing my calendar and I literally wasn't accepting my meeting invites. So they were all like dithered on my calendar.
Yeah.
But then it makes me pause. I'm like, my schedule is probably busier here than it ever has been because I don't have this infrastructure and team around me. But you just, the bigger you get, the more comfortable you get with some of those conveniences, if you will. And at the end of the day, you don't really need them because I would say we're very successful here without me having an admin.
Yeah, it's funny though. Doug keeps saying that his admin will respond to my text messages, and neither one of them has responded yet. So I don't know what's going on with that.
Hey, I know. Every time Doug's calling me, I get this phone call. Can you take a call from Doug Rogers right now?
Yeah. Oh, that's weird because
that's an AI agent.
Yeah, I programmed Doug in as spam. Do not answer.
Yeah.
Well, this has been delightful.
So let me shift gears a little bit here. We're going to kind of move into we're going to do a bit of a look back.
Yeah.
So go back to the beginning of what got you into sales.
Yeah, this will be fun.
Before we do, I want to take a moment to just thank our sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 sponsors, the upper right corner, which is my company. We do growth consulting, interim leadership, strategic planning, all that cool stuff. It's a blast. I love doing it. If you have questions, you need something, you're growing a company, you're trying to figure out what your next step is, go to market, go to network, whatever that is, give me a shout. We'll flash the website or whatever on the screen. Would love to talk to you. I'm going to have Doug talk about Waypoint here in a moment. And then I want to mention our third sponsor, which is the Echelon. If you like this kind of conversation where we're just being real about what's going on in our market with growth, the things we struggle with as leaders, what's working, what's not, and you want to have a community where you can ask those questions in a safe environment, whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a growth leader, a chief growth officer, whatever, the Echelon is a community for that. So what Amy Teskey and the Echelon team are doing is really special. So if you like this podcast, the Echelon's like the next level. It's great community. We love it. Doug and I are proud to be a part of the Echelon. We encourage you to check it out and join. I'll turn it over to you, Doug, to talk about Waypoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I will just plug in for the Echelon. They throw wonderful soirees.
We don't know how to pronounce it, but it's wonderful.
Doesn't matter. It's just fun to go to. So absolutely take advantage of that. And then, as James said, Waypoint, which is my company, is proud to sponsor the Counterweight, and we're focused on patient engagement, patient navigation for healthcare systems with a domain expertise around voice AI. And yes, it's the voice AI that I'm using to either make all my calls to James or Chris or to screen all my calls. Super valuable. Highly recommend it. So thank you to our sponsors. We could not do it without you, literally. So let's turn the page as James suggested, Chris, and we'll take you back in time. You haven't always been at HART. You weren't always in the big chair, if you will, at Oracle, Cerner. How did you first get started into sales? And did you always know that this was a journey you wanted to be on?
I did not, actually. I truthfully didn't aspire for a career in sales. Technically, my first sales role, I used to sell newspaper ads for my college newspaper.
Yeah.
So newspaper ads, that was my first foray into sales. I still didn't want to be a sales guy. It was just all my best friends, some of them my roommates in college, they were journalism kids. So I just wanted to hang out with my friends, and I hated writing. I still don't really like writing. So I sold the ads, and I could hang out in the newspaper office and goof around. It was very beneficial because through that, I met my wife, now my wife.
Oh, wow.
She was a writer, still is a writer.
Was she really?
So,
wow.
Yeah. My pickup line, she had a great feature story. She's going to be horrified probably that I'm telling the story.
We need to bring her on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you want the roast of Chris, bring my wife on.
Part 2.
Yeah, she had some feature story that she was getting some notoriety for one week. And she looked at me in the meeting. She said, "Did you read my story?" And I said, "I don't really read the newspaper, but if it was close to one of my ads, maybe I saw it." It worked. She married me. But
Wow. The charm.
so then I graduate.
That's a bold move.
Humility.
Right there.
I think humility is the word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Anyway, let's get this back on track. So
we are
an
going to have
actual
her
sales.
on. We are going to have her on to verify whether that story is completely accurate. Because when
That'll be.
the meeting stories are always a little different. Like my wife has a different version of how she and I met, but my version's better.
Yeah. Oh,
No. Yeah.
trust me, there are details that are more incriminating I'm leaving out.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I get out of college and I'm starting to take life a little bit more seriously at this point. I still didn't aspire to be a salesperson. I started at Cerner out of college. There was a point where I knew I was going to be a doctor, and then I decided I didn't want to go to school for the next 20 years.
Oh.
I met my wife. She's from Kansas City. I did the whole meet the parents thing, and my now mother-in-law said, and I said, I could totally live in Kansas City if I could just find a job. And so my mother-in-law said, well, there's this computer company called Cerner. I have no idea what they do. So that was my introduction to Cerner. And
they're like, you work at a healthcare company. Is that better than a nurse?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a line from Meet the Parents. Thank you.
All great one. Yeah. So then it was great because I found Cerner in a career fair. I said, my girlfriend's mom told me about you guys, landed me an interview. And I wish I remembered who this person was, but like in my experience Cerner day, there was a person that said, if I had to describe who we are, we're at the intersection of healthcare and business. And I was like, wow, that's pretty fortuitous because like that's where I'm at. So it just felt right. But I didn't want to go into sales. I started kind of in a junior project management role. I did some project management for several years. And then I had a manager. Shout out to Rebecca Lanassa if she listens to this.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
She was fantastic. Is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Rebecca, she gave me some advice one day. She said, hey, Cerner is a very entrepreneurial company. So if you want to go far here and frankly, make some good money while you're doing it, I'd recommend you try out sales. And so she kind of planted that seed. And in 2009, when meaningful use was put into law, I thought, well, when is there a better time to try out my hand in sales than when the government's mandating everybody has to buy what I'm selling? And so,
it did help.
That certainly helped, so that I was slinging electronic medical record system for physician practices. And in those days, physician practices.
Okay.
Yeah. Those days, physician practices were private practice, the doctor owned the clinic. The doctor's spouse was the receptionist and the billing manager. And so that's kind of who I was selling to, largely because of meaningful use, but I had a knack for it. I enjoyed it. And so that was really when I started getting into sales and thought maybe I could do this for a career.
Yeah. It's such a, I didn't realize that you had grown up in the ambulatory space. And to your point, for our listeners, right today, you think of most of your physician practices are either affiliated or owned by a health hospital or health system. To Chris, to your point, at the time, a preponderance of these physicians were independent. You essentially were selling to a small business. And it may have been highly incentivized by the federal government. That didn't make the friction easier for a small business that was looking at every single dime in terms of their expense side and how they were surviving, making payroll, et cetera, every single day. Talk a little bit about, as you went through that journey, transitioning into the sales role, selling to doctor practices, if you will. What are some of the things, either process-wise or methodology-wise, that you did that put you in a position for success? And kind of back to what we talked about earlier, where did you stub your toe? Were there some things you tried or didn't try hard enough and you're like, well, crap, that didn't work? I got to figure out something else that kind of puts me back on track.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, so I was selling to a small business, and largely, these were physicians that owned their own business, sometimes for 30 years before I would call them. And they had no interest in buying an EMR at that time.
Yeah, not at all.
They also
Still
didn't really use, they didn't use email, this was a different time. And so my first approach was like, I had to know everything inside and out about the software. A lot of times in sales, we call on somebody else to come in and do the demo. And I did my own demos, and I did that because I wanted to know inside and out how it works. And then as I started to understand, the nuances of different specialists and, what types of patients do they see on a recurring basis, I would start to build out my demo, my workflow notes to it, very specialty specific. So again, like, they could realize they're talking to somebody that understands what they do every day. But then knowing that I didn't always have somebody who was into using technology, taking everything that I knew about the software and simplify the daylights out of it. Because it's so easy to get stuck in the, like, I want to tell you about all my bells and whistles and features and functionalities, that you start to like lose them. So this concept of like simplifying complex things, that's probably where I developed that first, is, and then trying to relate to people so they can understand it. And
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And
where did I stub my toe? I
Yeah.
almost forgot to answer that one. Oh man.
Probably because you didn't. It was all hunky dory.
Everything went perfectly.
Yeah.
No mistakes were made.
Yellow brick road.
End of story.
I love this one. And Julie Smith, if you're listening, this is you. To do your own demos, you had to be certified I'm sure you still do. And Julie managed the certification. And so there was a demo script that she wrote, and I couldn't read off of it, but I had to sit down with her live and do this demo. And she didn't pass me the first time that I took the test. Yeah. Little did she know, I had been doing my demos for actual clients for a while at that point.
Julie.
Yeah.
Did you tell her that afterwards? Say, hey, why did you not pass me? Because people are buying from me.
If she's listening, this might be the first time she hears that little tidbit.
Yeah, maybe you saw it next to one of my ads.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I didn't pass the test the first time, but I did, I got up, I tried it again, I passed it the second time.
You're humbled, man. That's all right. You learned. That's great, man. Great story. Thanks, Julie, for bringing your A game.
Hey, we will absolutely tag her when we post this episode.
We need to get Julie to thumbs up on that one.
See if she'll weigh in. I
would love to just, it's amazing how some things have changed so much, right? With technology, it's come a long way. Selling things completely remotely now is totally okay. And it isn't all about getting on an airplane like it used to be. Oh, you gotta get this deal done and get on an airplane. A lot of that has kind of evolved. What are you excited about as you think about the future of this industry, but also just your role, your craft, what it is that you're bringing? What gets you excited?
Yeah. That's a great question, because it brings me back to why I'm here at HART specifically. I think for the last probably 50 years, the industry has largely been focused on getting data into the system. So in the 70s, 80s, it was ancillary departments, because God forbid we make a doctor use a computer. But the ancillary departments, the lab, the radiologist, the pharmacy, we started digitizing those things. And then eventually meaningful use comes around, and we started now making doctors and nurses start putting things into the computer. But like the focus was getting data into the system. And now I think what's really cool is, sometimes I call it the so what era. Now it's like, okay, we've got all this data into the system. We got to get it out to go do something with it. And arguably you could say, well, we started doing that like in the 2010s timeframe with population health and analytics. And I would say, in some degree that is true. But those systems at that time were very tethered to the core EHR still. And now, it's how do we get the data out into all these other systems around the EHR that are going to drive like the real innovation in healthcare. And, so I think there's some other players in the population health analytics space that are making some real progress. And it's forcing the bigger players to just frankly be better. But even, when you think about the buzzword population health, a lot of the early focus on population health was proactive disease management, taking early intervention, but they already had the disease or the illness. And I think what's really cool now is getting the data out. Where I see a lot of that demand coming from is in the life sciences area. So medical research, drug trials. And so instead of proactive disease management, it's like, what if we could just make sure people don't get sick in the first place? And that I think is really cool. To do that, you need a lot of data. And that's where HART sits is we help unlock that and get the data to wherever you need it to go. And we use automation. We do it super fast, very cost efficient. We can do it once, or we can do it continuously for a data feed. And so that's, why I thought coming here was pretty cool, because we're in this so what era. Everyone's trying to get data out, and a company like HART sits in the middle of all those transactions. So I just think that's pretty cool and exciting.
I love that mission. And just as an aside, there's this diatribe, if you will, this narrative that is going around in the healthcare ecosystem that point solutions are bad. And it's, everything has a time and a place, right? These are all cyclical. Point solutions had their heyday, then it was the EMR, then point solutions. And we're back to point solutions are bad. They create too much fragmentation. That's not first principles thinking. The reality, and this may be my opinion, I feel strongly though about this, the reality is that the blockage is not too many point solutions. It's the inability to free the data, to move the data, make it accessible, and then empower these key solutions that do something really, really well. And then you can talk back and forth, right? Chris, I would say HART, y'all are solving a need that opens up this ecosystem that has been built around the digitization of healthcare. It's been hard. It's caused pain, but there's so much goodness there. But that next turn is going to be done through the solutions, the capabilities, the offerings that companies like HART are making available that empower things that my small business is doing, are the 5 other digital health companies that are building a solution around a condition state or a use case, et cetera, are going to be made available because of that. We've run through just a ton of really good stuff. Chris could not express how thankful we are to have you on the pod. And I think we actually have a couple of suggestions. One, your wife, Julie Smith. Certainly we need to have weigh in as corollary.
Got to hear the other side
content
of these stories, right?
That's right. Among others, I think there are probably some others that we should bring into the discussion. But we do like to close this with a, quite frankly, spicy, challenging, little
Hardball.
Controversial, hardball question. You may or may not be ready for it, but James is going to hit you up, and I encourage you, don't be afraid to go with your first instinct.
Well, look, we've been pretty civil up to this point, and
fairly,
that's
sort of.
that's coming to an end. The gloves are off. You're going to see the true side of the counterweight here. We're going to come at you hard. So here it goes. You got a huge client coming into town. One chance to take them to dinner. They say they want to have some of that Kansas City barbecue. Where do you take them?
Boy, this is a tough one. Okay, so I've got 2 options that I'm always going to go with one of the 2.
All right. Got to pick one.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, boy, I'm going to insult somebody here. I think the best sit down barbecue, a nice experience, dinner experience, professional, customer environment, Jack Stack in the Freight House District.
Okay. Yeah.
Is my go-to because it's amazing barbecue, really cool space. I just took our lead investor there a couple of months ago. We went to Jack Stack.
Yeah. Did he get the dinosaur ribs?
He did not get the dinosaur ribs, but we definitely got the onion rings and all the meats. The burnt ends. I feel like that's kind of a Kansas City staple. I always recommend the burnt ends anywhere I go in KC. But if this is just a smaller thing and we're gonna go grab lunch, I'm probably going to Joe's KC because that's where you get like the authentic experience. You're going to until recently, like literally an operating gas station for barbecue.
Still an operating gas station.
Yeah, I think I went.
Or did they get rid of the pumps?
They have the pumps, but they took the handles off the pumps. I could be wrong about that.
Probably because people thought that's where the barbecue sauce was.
They were really surprised. They're like, "Oh my God, this barbecue sauce is really runny and flammable."
That's how they lit the fire in the smoker. They just poured a little gasoline in there.
That's right.
Oh man.
Well,
good choice. Good choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, this has been a fantastic conversation journey. Thank you for joining the Counterweight. Really appreciate you sharing the path that you've been on.
Yeah, likewise. I'm humbled to be here. Always good to talk to you guys. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Go get him.
Thank you for listening. We are excited to bring new episodes out each week. We are incredibly grateful to our guests and our listeners. Let us know what you think by commenting on the episodes. The Counterweight is honored to be sponsored by The Echelon by Amy Teskey. The Echelon is intentional about building community and sharing expertise for healthcare technology sellers and leaders. The Echelon provides members curated content, education materials, and the ability to connect with peers and leaders specific to healthcare technology. Sales can be hard. It is made easier when you are part of a community that is focused on enabling you to be your best. Take an opportunity to invest in yourself, join the Echelon, use the code Counterweight, and gain the ability to participate for the first 30 days at no cost. Thank you to Amy Teskey and the Echelon for your sponsorship. We are also proudly sponsored by the Upper Right Corner, which provides advice on strategic growth, including growth assessments and strategy, go-to-network planning, sales leadership, team coaching, and fractional leadership roles. For more, visit theupperrightcorner.com. Lastly, we are proud to be sponsored by Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. Waypoint Healthcare is a focused consulting organization helping health systems, providers, and organizations develop and implement patient engagement strategies. Waypoint HCS provides strategic consulting and patient engagement technology guidance and selection. Waypoint also helps support implementations and ongoing program management. For more, visit Waypoint HCS's LinkedIn page or waypointhcs.com. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe, like, and follow, and we look forward to joining you again next Wednesday for another episode of The Counterweight.